I am so excited to be here today to share with you this presentation of how to become a CISO that comes from my years of experience. And I hope everyone is just really going to love this content. And if you're thinking about being a CISO, this is the right track for you. All right. So, just a little bit about my background, in case you haven't seen me before. My name's Ross Young. I've spent over 20 years in cybersecurity. I spent the most of my career at the Central Intelligence Agency. I spent 10 and a half years there, 5 years as a nation state hacker, and then I led the DevOps program. I also had the ability to work in the commercial side. I went to Capital One in 2018, so I got to experience the large Capital One breach in 2019 that happened. And then for 4 years, I was the CISO of Caterpillar Financial and had a really good opportunity to learn a lot of what it is to be a CISO. And then last but not least, I would just say I love being a mentor, love being an educator. So I've taught at Johns Hopkins for 5 years, and G. Mark Hardy and myself co-founded a podcast called CISO Tradecraft, where if anybody really wants to learn how to improve their CISO capabilities, it's a fantastic place to go and listen to a little bit more. All right. So enough about me. Let's talk about you. Hopefully you have some aspirations to be a CISO. And why would you want to be that? I started thinking about that question myself. It's because you have the top level cyber position. You have the largest responsibility for making sure that cybersecurity program is exactly how you think it should be. And you have the largest ability to drive change. There's a lot of times when I was in my career and I think back, I'm like, man, why won't these leaders just get it? They need to do it this way. And when you are in the CISO role, you're essentially in that driver's seat where you have the ability to change the cyber organization more than any other person in that organization. So if you like that, if you have that ambition and you have that, I just got to get it right, this is the role for you. And then last but not least, it gives you the ability to leverage people, process, and technology. So if you like picking tech tools, if you like optimizing processes, if you like helping people, mentoring and building that next generation of leadership and people in your organization, this is where you can do that more than any other role. Now, as we start to think about it, the first question you may have to say is, well, how do we get there? There's a little bit more than just going on LinkedIn and applying for that job. Not everybody is qualified to be a CISO. And in fact, there's actually a pattern that emerges over and over again when you look at the cybersecurity leaders to say, how did they get there? And how can I duplicate that process for myself? And so as we look at that, I really want you to think about there are 4 different types of skill categories that you need to grow in your career. The first being technical, then management, then leadership, then political skills. So let's dive into each of these 4 skill categories that are out there and then figure out, what does it look like? How do I grow in these skills? And how will I know when I'm kind of achieving this optimization? The first is technical skills. Now, the first gotcha where people think is like, oh, I don't have a college degree, or oh, I don't have all these certifications. You don't actually have to have that to be technical, but you do need to become technical in something. Think about it this way. You need to be an expert in something. It doesn't matter what it is, it needs to be in something specific for cybersecurity. You could be an expert in incident response. You could be an expert in cybersecurity audits and governance, risk, and compliance. You could be an expert in pen testing. Whatever it is, you need to become the expert that your organization looks to you to say, wow, I have a question on this. Let's go to the expert. And then they think of you. If you do that, you are now achieving the first stage of being technical here. And as we think about that, you'll usually have roles in a company like an analyst, like an engineer, like a pen tester, or something else that tells that role. And so once you gain that expertise, a lot of times what I tell people is do it in 2 different areas. So maybe you're the expert in pen testing, and then you become the expert in cloud security. And now you have 2 different things that you will continually be able to help the organization get better on based on your experiences. Now, once you have demonstrated that expertise in these technical skills, the next thing you're going to see is you're usually going to be tapped to get a team lead or a first line manager role. And in that, the skill set completely changes. Instead of how good you are on the keyboard to do something technical, now it's about how well can you communicate? How well can you run an effective budget? How well can you do the procurement of tools, which takes 6 months or a year in a large organization? How do you keep things under time, scope, and budget, right? And so if you do those things, now you are effectively working as a first level manager or team lead. And if you notice, just look at this example, how different the skills are. You're not technical, right? You're focusing on project management, budget, procurement, communication skills. And we'll dive into those a little bit larger. But right now, I'm just giving the 10,000-foot view before we dive into those. Now, once you do this and you get that first level manager success, then you're going to be tapped again to get a leader of leader roles. And you may hear this a divisional manager, a senior director, or vice president, depending on what they call it at your company, right? And here, now that you're managing managers, you need to execute strategic plans. You need to mentor first line managers. You need to make sure that you have that employee happiness and high retention scores in your organization in order for that to be successful. And then last but not least are what we call the political skills. These are the things you really need as a CISO. Because once you're at that highest level, it's how do you influence an organization, particularly when you're not reporting to anyone in cyber anymore. You are the top level cyber. You're reporting to a CIO, a CTO, a CEO, someone else who is largely untechnical and largely needs, to understand cyber, and you have to communicate in a very effective way. So let's dive in to each of these 4 different things that are here and see what that looks like so that we can learn how to grow these skills. The first thing that I would say is take a look at the CISO Tradecraft podcast. There's about 4.5 years of content. You can go to this website or look at this QR code or just search it at CISOTradecraft.com. And you'll see we take each of our episodes and categorize these according to these 10 domains. And why is this so key? Maybe you grew up doing largely non-technical things. You started in GRC, you went to audit, you've done a lot of SOC 2, third-party risk management, those types of things. Well, as you want to become a CISO, you need to understand the broader categories of what cybersecurity has. So maybe you've never spent time in a SOC. Well, how can I learn about what happens in the SOC? Or maybe you haven't done vuln management. Or maybe you're not familiar with GDPR and DORA or the AI Act coming out of the EU right now. So start to look for these other disciplines so you're cross-trained and you're more knowledgeable as a CISO, and then you can help more people in your organization. Now, once you do that, you're going to start to see that learning technical skills usually comes from certifications. Think of SANS. They have the GIAC course in a variety of different disciplines, one being like the Certified Incident Handler. That's a great place where you can go to learn the skills, to learn how to do intrusion response and working in that SOC effective role. Additionally to that, there's a lot of self-study you can do. A lot of people just go and read the book. And I just think about in 2005, I starting my career, I went and I read the Security Plus official study guide cover to cover and then took the test. And then I did the same thing for the CISSP. But really what you want to do is find technical domains. And usually when I coach a lot of young people coming out of college, a lot of these things is about not only getting good in cyber, but understanding that developer's perspective. So one of the things I also highly recommend for people is looking at things like the AWS Solutions Architect, because if you know and understand how developers build code and build web applications and servers, then you can better defend the product security things around that and saying, oh, you're building it this way, but you didn't add in these controls here. Or the way you're doing AWS, you didn't think about this, and you should really have these AWS mitigations here. And that is the thing of understanding the developer perspective and the cyber perspective so that you can put your your understanding in the feet of developers and best help them to improve cybersecurity, because most often developers are really the first ones to fix anything cybersecurity related. Now, once you do that, I need you to understand what the most common organizational hierarchy looks like across any large cybersecurity company. You have the CISO, and you have a number of major pillars. You have the architecture and engineering folks that run all of the tools. You have application security where you run vuln management. You have your ISOs or BISOs talking to developers saying, hey, please go fix these things. You might have your disaster recovery or business continuity planning. And then you have other groups like governance, risk, and compliance who do risk assessments, who do, work with outside regulators and auditors and third-party risk management in your security awareness program. And then you have identity management and SOC. And so without going into too much of these details, look at the color codes here. You will see that in these gray blocks are individual functions, if you will. And subject matter experts get good at one of these boxes, right? Your technical expertise should be you understand how to do access control in your organization better than anybody else, so that when somebody has an access control question, they come to you. And that makes you valuable to the company. It makes you valuable to helping people in the organization. And then you go cross-train and you go somewhere else. And a good manager will understand the vertical, everything under this orange pillar, right? Because they're working and reporting to their division manager. And when they do that, it allows them to have more knowledge. But a CISO has to go horizontal. They have to understand all of these different areas. Now, make no assumption that the CISO knows every area 100%. They absolutely have to lean and trust on their people. But you need to be knowledgeable enough to understand the goals, the metrics, the successes of each of the programs so that you can apply the right resources. You can call BS when they're trying to get more money that you simply don't have in your budget program. And so when you have these things, it can really help you understand. And just as a heads up, I do see some questions coming in the chat. I will have minutes of time at the end, and we'll go through those chats. So definitely put them in the chat, and we'll review those in a few minutes there. Okay, so now that we understand these technical things, and we said the largest way to largely gain them is by doing some type of certification program, we need to start to think about, well, how is that different when we do the management skills? And managers have to learn communication, have to learn project management, have to learn budget skills, all of those things that we mentioned before. Here's a couple of my favorite books that have really helped me grow in my career. The first book is a book called Crucial Conversations. And I just want to tell you a story, right? Sometimes you're in a meeting with an employee and they just do something dumb. And you cannot tell them, oh my God, that was just so freaking stupid. Why did you do that? If you do that as a manager, they will basically hate you till the day they die, right? And you don't want to do that. You want to be that manager that is fun, that's outgoing, that is super, positive, that builds the team up. And so a lot of times I had to learn how to ask questions in a way that wasn't going to offend people. And at the same time, I could actually get the right types of things I was looking for. And so instead of asking that tough question before, maybe we just tweak it a little bit and be like, hey, I see you're doing some interesting things here. I don't know if you intended this, but when you took these actions, here's how they played out, which was difficult for the team. And so what you're doing is you're still asking the same tough question, but you're giving them a way to save face. You're giving them a way to share their points of view, and you just want to understand what they were trying to do. And now here they're going to say, oh, I was trying to do this. And then you can have that honest, crucial conversation with them that really helps them understand how to improve and work with them. That was hugely important for me because I was a very direct speaker and I had to learn how to be just a little bit more sensitive when I'm asking questions, because it's not talking about how you want to be treated, it's about how they want to be treated. And learning that as a manager is so key. The next thing is you really need to learn your management style, right? The way that you work may be very different than other people. And how do you build effective processes to, build a program, vision, statement, actions? I recommend this book by Christian Hyatt. It's called The Security Team Operating System. He goes through how do you build that out in a security program. Really, really helpful for first line managers. And then last but not least, this book has been around a while. Gary Hayslip, Matt Stamper, and Bill Bonney wrote this book called the CISO Desk Reference Guide. You can think of this as almost like the encyclopedia on being a CISO. They cover so many different topics. And what I'll say is it's helpful to understand how programs need to happen, all the different functions, because you have to learn that the first time in order to understand what management is trying to achieve in cyber. And so it's a good book to read as a good primer to understand cyber. Now, when I start to think about management skills and I start to say, what are things you want to improve on? You'll see here's the slide deck, and every one of these things actually has a link to a particular 45-minute podcast that G. Mark Hardy and I have put together over the years. So good management looks like people who are really good at conversations, looks like people who can really run an effective meeting. Haven't you just been in that meeting where you're like, oh my God, I think we just wasted 45 minutes of our time. There was no agenda. There was no point of this meeting. Could have been done in an email. Do those things right. Make your meetings like the best meetings that everybody comes to and be like, wow, that was super, super powerful. And guess what? Now everybody wants to come to your meetings. You're getting better presence. That's really, really key. We talk about executive presence. If everybody only sees you as this like nerdy technical person who doesn't have comm skills, well, that's going to be a career inhibitor from you reaching that CISO role. And so there's different things on presentation skills and how to build team and with some of these techniques. Now, let's say you've actually mastered this level. You've been that first line manager. Now you're getting promoted to the manager of manager role. Here, what I would say is you really want to grow your leadership skills. And I know sometimes people will say anybody can be a leader. You don't have to be in a manager role to be a leader. Totally get that perspective. Think about here what you're trying to do is influence and persuade, right? And so we're going to have that. And I'll just give you some books that I found were really, really helpful for me. The first is The Phoenix Project. And if you've never read or listened to this book, it's absolutely probably one of our most fundamental books in IT as an industry. Imagine there's this company that just is terrible and they're just struggling to make a IT successful. And basically that company needs to die and be reborn, aka the Phoenix. And they do this thing, and it talks about how they have to influence and change these things that are not working. Like we can all write a cybersecurity policy that says patch everything in 7 days. And then when developers don't do that, what's next? What's next when your policies fail, right? What's next when you have to change culture? And how do you do that? Another example is CIO Wisdom. This is another book that came out, and it came out a good amount of time ago. But I got to tell you, the same problems haven't changed. Like, how do we recruit the best talent? How do we actually build a cybersecurity strategy 3-year roadmap? Those types of questions are absolutely or answered in this book, and it's the same answers that still apply today. So take a look at this, written by some fantastic people. And then last but not least, I would tell you to look at the Cyber Defense Matrix. This is written by Sunil Yu. It's another book that is really changing of how do we think about our industry? How do we think about coverage? How do we think about utilization? How do we think about tools? And it helps you understand where we're going and what needs to be in a comprehensive cyber program. Okay, so how do leadership skills look different than the management skills that I just linked? And just remember, you can find all of these links in the PowerPoint that's going to be sent out, and it'll directly connect to everything. But here you're going to start to be, maybe the ones helping prepare the CISO for their board decks. Maybe you're going to be speaking up to the executive leadership team for the first time. You won't be attending those meetings on a weekly or monthly basis, but you may be back briefing that CISO and providing his point of view. You're also going to be doing mentoring and sponsoring. Like, how do you start to build those first sets of followers who trust, who really like working for you because you're helping them in their career, you're helping build these programs, you're really fixing the things that are wrong or broken in the organization. And then also, you actually come together with a helpful plan. What does the first 90 days look like for the organization? And you build that in a way that's going to be successful. All right. So let's talk about what that actually looks like and give some examples. I like to just think of three questions. Where are we now? Where should we be? And how do we get there? And this comes from that CIO leadership book and also what I've been learning from Sunil Yu. And I started thinking about that. This is what my 3-year program looks like. I need to understand everything that's in the current environment. I need to talk to the business. What is it they think we should be doing and where we need to be in 2 to 3 years from now? Then I would put all that down and say, this is where the desire of the business is. We need a SOC 2. We need to be able to do third-party, risk assessments in 30 days instead of 90 days. We need to be able to respond faster to incidents. We need to approve things and access. All these things you're going to start to put together. And then you're going to basically go and compare the current versus the future and do a gap analysis and say, these are the 10 things that we currently can't do that the business expects us to do. And then you're going to have to put together a plan that says, how do we get there? And so as you look at that, what I tell people that they often get wrong is they only look from one point of view. You just look at a SOC 2 assessment and says, here's the 3 controls that your organization needs to improve on. I think that's very, very limiting. And I just want to provide some other views that I like to look at when I'm a CISO in that first 90 days and I'm building out this plan of where I want to transform this organization. One, do I even have the right workforce? Maybe I have the right tools in place, but the people here don't have the skills, don't have the ambition, don't have the drive. Do I need to change out my current staff? Or do I need to, invest in my current staff and give them the skills through training opportunities to get there and coaching? We talked about controls. Another one is tools. One of the things I was surprised is I went to this one organization at Capital One where we had all these great tools. And then I went over to Caterpillar and some of the tools that I was expecting to be there, which just were not there. And I was like, well, how do we even stop this risk if we don't even have this tool that would secure it? And so knowing what tools you have and what gaps there are, that's a huge thing. And then also knowing what laws and regulation. And I'll just give you a simple way to do this. One of my favorite things to do is go to talk to the chief legal officer and say, what laws do you want me to follow? I will absolutely follow any law that you tell me to follow. But if you don't tell me, don't expect me at the end of the year to have all this evidence that we did this thing if I didn't even know this was a requirement for me to document the evidence for. And so then they would go and say, here's the 3 laws that we're most likely to get audited and regulated on. Okay, cool. We're a public company. We're going to do Sarbanes-Oxley. We're a bank, so we got to follow the New York Department of Financial Services, NYDFS, or whatever it is, or HIPAA if you're healthcare. And then as you put those together and say, okay, here's the evidence that we have. We're going to deliver this. This is really, really important. Remember, you cannot deliver perfect security, but you can say, given this budget, these are the things I'm going to produce. Are you happy with this before we spend this money? And then if everybody's all in agreement, now you have an effective program that you can build. And then also talk about the business objectives. Maybe the business has a huge focus that they're building a mobile app next year. Well, if they're going to build this and bet the house on it, and it's going to be their new flagship project, there's probably a security requirement for that to making sure that mobile app is nice and secure. And it doesn't just have to be a mobile app. It can be any new technology. Maybe it's on AI that they're all betting the house. Well, there's probably something different on AI hallucinations that you got to check that you didn't check last year. So you look through those things, and then also the last threats to the business. So maybe you see the Verizon data breach report that says, oh, the biggest attack right now is reusing stolen credentials. Maybe we need to buff up our multi-factor authentication program, and you build those out. And so this is how you have to think from multiple points of view so you get those recommendations. Then afterwards, you do the gap analysis. You say, here's where we are in the status quo. Here's where we want to be. These are the things that we have to actually go and build out to get there. And so maybe you have a current SOC 2, but you got to get a SOC 2 updated for next year. Well, you got to do a bridge letter to get there. Or maybe you haven't done NYDFS evidence before, and now you have to provide all that for your controls. And so as you start to do that, you start to really build out what are the things missing and what you have to build in your roadmap. And then you go back and say, well, how do I put this in the simplest, easiest way for the rest of the executive team to understand? And it's a one pager, right? What are the goals? What are the initiatives? And what are the metrics or key performance indicators behind those things to help you? And so you may have a goal that says, hey, we are really going to be good at creating security awareness and vigilance. And that requires two things. We got to make sure the developers understand how to build secure apps, and we got to make sure everybody else doesn't click on phishing and plug USB drives into their laptops. So you build those KPIs around those things and create that chart. Now, as you start to do this, you're going to, eventually have more and more impact for a company. And then you get that opportunity to jump into that CISO seat. And over here, now things change from just leading programs to now political skills. And I want to share with you how to think about this. When you think about politics, and I know not everybody loves politics, it just sounds like a dirty word, but there's two things you have to think about. Is this a conversation with a one-on-one, or is this I'm trying to change the masses, the thousands of people at my company to do something? And then once you understand which of those two conversations you're in, then you need to choose different ways. And when I think about the one-on-one, coming from the CIA background and NSA and other places, I really love thinking about it like, how do spies recruit foreign assets? Think about it this way. How can an FBI or a CIA officer recruit a Russian, officer to, be a traitor for their country? That's a hard ask to get somebody to do that. And it starts with building rapport with people and understanding what their interests are, what their goals, motivations are, and all of these things. And you can start to read about these things from, experts like Robin Dreek in this book, It's Not All About Me, of how to build rapport with people. And now as you start to do these things and you understand how to build these friendships and connections, do that with your chief financial officer, do that with your chief legal, do that with your chief compliance officer. And now what you're going to see is the world works on relationships, and what it works on is having those, people who've done things for each other. If you have saved your friends time and time again out of these situations, they know they can trust you. And usually if you call them and like, hey, I just need a favor. Can you do this for me? Of course they're going to help their friends. That's the way the world works. And so learning those things is really, really key. And now another example of this is how do you do when you need to work on the masses? And my favorite illustration of this is video games. Video games, we play for fun and we use our time to do it. And it's very fun and very addicting to do this. So why is it we play video games? It just takes time out of our lives. We don't even get paid to play video games for most of us. It's because they leverage things called gamification techniques that are very attractive for folks to get interested in. And there's a great book called Game Frame by Aaron Dignan, and he walks through these different things here of what you can do. And just think of things like leaderboards, virtual currencies, other things that hook people into video games. And then start to think about how can you apply those into your cyber organizations so that people want to do things. The incentives are aligned. They're getting recognition. They're getting training. They're getting things that are fun and engaging for them. And I'll give you an example of some of these things here going forward. But highly, highly recommend these three books. The first two books are all about how do you persuade people and negotiate one-on-one. And then the third book is really about how do I improve those gamification capabilities so I can get thousands of developers to buy into patching in less than 30 days. So I can get all the organizations competing to have the best phishing scores and overall lower the phishing rates in our company. So now that we start to do this, another example of something that you're going to learn is process improvement. And I love this quote from W. Edwards Deming. He says, the role of management is to change the process rather than just telling individuals to do better. And he was the one who went to Japan post-World War II and helped transform their economy so that they actually became able to produce automobiles at a higher technical standard quality than a lot of American companies. And the way he did that is by using things like process management. And let me just give you an example here. Here is vulnerability management. And you can just think of here's the 15 steps in order to do patch management or vuln management. First of all, we need a tool like Qualys or Rapid7 to find a vulnerability. Then we actually have to figure out who is the team that actually owns that vuln. And then we need to make sure it's not a false positive. And then we need to, do all the little steps until they actually roll out the patch and make sure it's good. And what you're going to see here is in this middle category is average time. This is the average time today it takes an organization to go and fix said vulnerability. In these numbers would be different for your organization, but let's just say it takes 2 hours or 120 minutes for Qualys to scan your server to find a vuln. Well, now what you want to do is you want to talk to your folks and say, what if we could do this in 10 minutes, and change the scanner here? How much time could we save? And you have this kind of council of experts where they go through and say, well, here's how fast we could do any of these steps in an optimal world. And what you'll notice is I actually have two things, outlined in a red bold here, performing regression testing or doing a change approval process. And what you'll see is if you actually save these two steps, you can save almost 3,000 minutes of the 3,590 total in the category. So you don't have to fix all 15 steps in the process to make the process better. Just fix these two and life gets really, really good. And so this is really the key of being a CISO. It's being able to not go in and say, well, we have to fix this one CVE and then tactically manage it. It's process improvement so the whole organization gets better by understanding where broken processes are and how to fix them through a little bit of data analysis like the following. And I want to also tell you another story of something I was able to do while I was at Caterpillar. And this will go back to that gamification example that I gave before. When I came there, the phishing scores were a little bit higher than where I wanted them to be. And I knew I needed to have a way that would motivate people to not click the phishing link. Now, you can just go and tell people, don't click the phishing link. And I'm sure everybody has heard that message for freaking 10 years now or longer. And so, it's not really motivating. You're like, I know, just leave me alone. And you can just think about like all those other times we're stuck in other training classes that we don't want to be in. Right? And someone's saying, oh, here is your mandatory class that you have to take. That's how the rest of the organization views mandatory cyber training. So how did I flip that? Well, what I ended up doing is saying, rather than just don't click the phishing scores, we are going to have a brisket party. And I don't know if you know, but I was in Nashville at the time, and good barbecue brings people in, especially a good brisket. I know the people from Texas here on the invite are probably, cheering. But that's what we did. We said, how can we bring something to reward whatever team does the best? And so we went online, we bought a $10 trophy that looked like a bass fish and put fishing champion. We would have the leaders give that out. I would bring this homemade brisket that I would make into the office, and we would recognize and celebrate the team that did the best. And guess what happens? All the people would come in and be like, wow, that food was so good. And they would bring in their own homemade, potato salad recipe or whatever it is. And they were just having fun. And then cyber doesn't get viewed like the freaking traffic cop writing tickets that everybody hates. You get viewed as the place that has the fun parties, that has the good food, that gives out trophies. And guess what? Everybody wants to win that phishing contest. And so now what do? They start asking me as the CISO, hey, can you come talk to my team? Can you share like some ways we can improve our phishing scores? I really want to beat these other teams. And oh, by the way, I can't be last. I was at the bottom two on this leaderboard last time. And so now how do I do that? And that culture change by using gamification techniques of leaderboards, of rewards and incentives, and other things like this really changes an organization so they become super excited to perform better at phishing, right? This wasn't just sending an email saying, don't click the link. This was using those gamification techniques. And so, as a closing thoughts, and I'm going to kind of switch over to a live Q&A session over here, it's really about 4 different things. You need to grow in technical skills. You need to grow in management skills. You need to grow in leadership skills, and you need to learn in political skills, both the one-on-one from how to build rapport with people and the gamification piece of how to talk to the masses. Here's my email in case anybody's interested in talking more. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Ross Young, easy to find. And we also have things on the podcast here to help you learn and grow. But now, maybe Frank, if you want to go through some of the live Q&A, and we can just help people with their questions here.